Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for joining us. But we're going to talk about two hugely important subjects to all of us. The status of the opioid crisis in America, but first, energy prices are in flux. What does that mean to those of us who use energy? And that's all of us. Back after these words.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, as I indicated in the intro, I'll tell you what, when we start talking about the opioid crisis in our country and energy, and remember now, we're in July, we're not in December and January and February, and we couldn't have a better individual to chat about energy than Terry Fitzpatrick. He's the president and CEO of the Energy Association of Pennsylvania. Terry, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, now look, on this show, we have on many occasions talked about energy prices, but those prices have been in flux lately. What do the folks need to know about energy prices as you and I chat right now?
Right. Well, I'm smiling a little bit as we start this conversation, Terry, because I have better news to give to customers, and customers already know that, of course. But energy prices have really come down a lot from last year. I mean, last year we were facing kind of a perfect storm. Coming out of the pandemic, demand was picking up, that tightened supplies, that raises prices, and then the war in Ukraine really drove things over the top. But since then, we've had production, particularly natural gas production, has ramped up in Pennsylvania and in the country. In addition to that, we had a milder than normal winter last year, so we didn't use as much energy. So the supply-demand situation is much better right now. At the wholesale level, the price of natural gas is less than half of what it was.
Less than half.
Less than half of what it was a year ago. Now, that ends up translating into your utility bills, both electric and gas, but there's a little bit of a time lag because utilities buy in a way, they layer the contracts so that it doesn't fluctuate as much as the market. But those prices are coming down. That's good news for customers.
Yeah. And is demand for energy down? I mean, we've heard over and over again how we're supposed to be concerned about the energy use in our daily lives, right, about cutting down what I'll call unnecessary use. Is that going on as well?
That's going on as well. There's ongoing efforts in the industry, both electric and gas, to enhance energy efficiency, as it's called. To get more bang for the buck, for the energy that you use. And that's a very important policy, particularly for both economic reasons and for climate and to control climate change as well.
Yeah, and I want to talk about another aspect about investments in it, which is very important in the next segment. But do you see a stability in the market that we haven't seen before?
Well, I certainly think,
and
Terry,
I know I shouldn't ask you to make a prediction.
No, but if you go back a little over a decade to the time the Marcellus Shale started to be developed, that really helped our energy prices. It lowered them, and it made them more stable as well. Now, these markets are still subject to shocks at times, things like the polar vortex or like last winter, when we had Winter Storm Elliott with that really severe drop in temperatures. That can really stress the system at times. But our supply-demand balance, particularly with natural gas, is good. Now, with electricity generation, we have an issue, and that's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about one other thing. Throughout the course of modern history anyway, back to, I'll say coal in particular, Pennsylvania was one of the nation's leader in the production of energy. How do we stand now?
Oh, we still are. We're an energy powerhouse. I mean, next to Texas, we produce more energy than any state in the country.
Natural gas.
That's the natural gas production. We're number 2, behind Texas in gas production. Electricity generation, I think we're number 3 in total generation, and we export more electricity than any other state in the country.
So we're exporting as well as using it internally.
Yes, that's correct.
And you don't see any diminution of that?
I don't. And, Politically, I think the two parties have different views on this to some extent, but I think, as you've said at times, everybody in Pennsylvania, both Democrats and Republicans, like to say that they're an all of the above energy advocate for the state. So that really has helped us in terms of developing those supplies, and also, importantly, developing the infrastructure that's needed to keep those supplies flowing.
Yeah, in the campaigns which we all follow in the politics of the state, there are certainly differences, but what's pretty fascinating is that they've never come to dominate. You know, it's not been the number one or number two issue that gets carried out, you know, particularly in legislative and how about this, the governor's elections.
That's correct.
And I don't see that changing.
I don't see it changing either. And, you know, frankly, I think that's been a good thing for Pennsylvania because that's allowed us to develop our resources. You know, I don't want to be too pointed with respect to other states and their policies, but if you look at New York, they won't develop the gas supplies that they have. I mean, we're developing those supplies to benefit everybody in the region. You know, and also developing the infrastructure, you know, the gas lines, the electric transmission lines that we need.
All right, maintaining reliable energy supplies, it's going to take investments. We'll talk with Terry Fitzpatrick about that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Terry Fitzpatrick is my guest at the moment. He's the president of the Energy Association of Pennsylvania. We're talking about a number of energy things that are important to all of us in the state, all of us in the country, maybe even the world, but we're focusing on our state. In order to have a reliable energy supply, it requires routine, regular investments, yes or no?
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the keys, one of the big keys. You need to continue to invest. I mean, all these energy systems are very capital intensive. It takes a lot of money to build power plants, to build electric lines, to build substations, to build natural gas lines. So you need to keep up with that investment because if you fall behind and things start to get bad, you can't turn it around very quickly. So it's very important to keep making that investment to keep it up.
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned you've mentioned on a number of occasions, and that is the necessity, you put it this way, that coal and natural gas plants are retiring. Does that mean they're out of business?
Yes.
They're done?
Yes. Yeah, the PJM, which runs the electric grid in the region, Pennsylvania and a number of other states surrounding us, going out even into the Midwest, they issued a report back in February of this year indicating that under current trends, they see problems coming down the road. There's not certainty about this, but it looks to them, based upon the trends, like there could be a shortage of electric generation coming. And the reason for that is, as you said, Terry, coal, and particularly coal, but also natural gas plants are retiring. And that's largely policy-driven, as PJM calls it.
Is that because that's internally driven by the fact that they're just simply old and not able to produce, or is it caused by environmental concerns, or both? Yeah,
it's not so much that they're old. It's more the environmental policies that are coming on board. In fact, Illinois even passed a law that dictated that these plants had to close some of them had to close by 2030. Yeah. And we're not adding generation nearly quickly enough. Almost everything that's proposed to be built now is renewable generation.
Right.
95% of what's approved to be built doesn't actually get built. So we're not adding either renewable or more gas, base load, as it's called, generation that you can dispatch 24/7. We're not adding enough of that. So it looks like we could have a shortage in 5 years. So PJM's looking at possible solutions to that. Probably involves paying some of those generating plants more to keep them online. Right. And I think we need to have a discussion, all the states in the PJM region, about what these policies are, because, we want to fight climate change, it's true, but we also want reliable electricity, and we can't take our eye off either of those important goals.
And, it used to be particularly coal, iron and steel, and now it seems like natural gas has really sort of become predominant out in the Southwest in Beaver County and other places around the state.
That's absolutely true. There's been a big shift from coal to natural gas as a result of the Marcellus and the low prices that have come out of that.
All right. First of all, thanks for coming on. All right, we're going to have an important update on the opioid crisis in our country, how it's expanding, and what can be done about that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by
Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Welcome back. Well, it dominates the media, I'll tell you, the opioid crisis and the number of people who die literally every day because of it. Joining me to talk about that and more is Dr. James Latronica. He is addiction medicine at the Pennsylvania Medical Society Board of Trustees.
Hi, Dr. Madonna. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for coming on the program. All right, let's start with this. The opioid crisis, it still exists in Pennsylvania and elsewhere, as I indicated, and it seems to be literally a dominant story. What's the status? Give us an update on the status.
Well, I hate to say, but it continues to get worse. We haven't even reached a plateau point yet, and this has been the case for the past few decades, but especially since the early 2000s and then several other inflection points along the way. So as much as I appreciate the efforts of folks here in the Commonwealth and at the federal level, I think there's very clearly something missing, and the evidence bears that out.
Most of the conversation, it seems to me, and you're the expert, has focused on fentanyl. But there's another drug that's now come into play that I think the folks ought to know about.
Yeah, I'm guessing you're talking about xylazine.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it would be useful to go back in time slightly to describe how this happened. So the first anti-drug laws in the country were racist anti-opium laws aimed at Chinese laborers, specifically on the West Coast at first. No one really died from opium. You can get addicted to opium for sure, but overdoses from opium, because of its chemical structure, are not impossible, but very rare. So when those were banned, there's a term called the Iron Law of Prohibition, which we saw during alcohol prohibition. As a substance becomes banned, it necessarily becomes more compact and more potent because it's easier to ship, easier to smuggle, more profitable. So we saw that with alcohol, with moonshine that was made both at home and also industrial grade alcohol that was purposefully poisoned by the federal government. in terms of opioids, we went from opium to heroin. And then eventually, as the global poppy supply has declined because of interdiction efforts of both the United States and other countries, we see an increase in synthetic fentanyl, which is about 50 times as potent as heroin, about 100 times as potent as morphine. Xylazine comes in that it's a white powder with similar effects. It's not an opioid. So when people say xylazine is resistant to naloxone, to Narcan, that it's sort of a redundancy. We wouldn't expect it to be. Xylazine is a sedative used mainly by veterinarians in anesthesia for veterinary procedures. It's a white powder, it's cheap, and it can cut both heroin and fentanyl. By cut, I mean put powder that's not the drug in that's cheaper, but has ideally similar effects. So xylazine has significant side effects. We can talk about that. I don't want to go on too long here, but my overarching point is that we keep playing whack-a-mole. We've been doing this for nearly a century. So some of the folks at home have probably been, hearing what I've been saying, but I really want you to listen to this next part.
Yeah. Well, let's hold on. Let's run to a break. When we come back, I want to talk about that and some other aspects of Pennsylvania and this drug overdose that's going on. We'll get to that segment after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine.
All right, well, we're chatting about a hugely important issue, the opioid crisis, with Dr. James Latronica. He's with the Pennsylvania Medical Society Board of Trustees and an expert on the opioid crisis. All right, doctor, drug regulation is very important, but there is a significant side effect.
Yeah, I like how you phrase that, because when we think of substances like heroin or cocaine, surely they have deleterious effects on the body. They can be addictive. They can cause problems. But what we've seen, going back to my analogy about alcohol prohibition, is when you have a substance that people want and that people will get, what happens when you ban it, we have 100 years of evidence to suggest this, is that it becomes more dangerous. One analogy I use is, yes, people under the age of 21 or previously under the age of 18 will drink alcohol. It's not ideal for their brains, but we know it happens. Everyone's been a kid. Most everyone's probably tried to buy alcohol before they were 21. But there are some safeguards. If someone were poisoned by alcohol, there's remediation available. The FDA would probably investigate, local police, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. There would be a way to find justice for the people who were poisoned or who died. When you have a banned drug supply, you don't have those safeguards. No one's checking the IDs of 16-year-olds who want to buy heroin like they would for alcohol. So when you talk about side effects, you're completely right in that, yes, these are potentially dangerous substances, but I think we've a century of evidence now suggesting that prohibition itself has significant side effects that have caused an immense amount of suffering.
Yeah, good point. I'll tell you something. Testing strips for some drugs are now legal. First of all, what's a testing strip and why is that important?
Pardon me. Yes, thank you for bringing that up. And I'd like to credit here the Pennsylvania Society of Addiction Medicine. Myself and my friends there, we were able to help the legislature pass a law. It was last year, permitting the testing of substances for fentanyl. So what a fentanyl test strip is it sort of looks like a pregnancy test strip, and you mix a little bit of your powder with water and you dip the strip and it turns a color. It's a yes or no. There's fentanyl in there or it's not. There are also test strips for xylazine. They're not as widely available. But again, there are so many contaminants in the drug supply. It's not just these two, that what you need right now is broader based drug supply testing. There's a form of chemical spectroscopy called FTIR. Groups like Dance Save, they have pop-up kiosks at concerts and festivals and things like that, so you can test for anything. Because there are patients there are friends and family members that we have who may be doing things or using substances we don't like that we know are harmful to them. I just don't believe that they deserve to suffer and die because they use those substances.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to Narcan. First of all, what is Narcan and why is it significant for treating someone with an overdose?
That's a really good question. And I think there has been sort of some misconception, some of it spurred by research in the realm of economics, unfortunately, as opposed to the health sciences. Narcan is a brand name of naloxone, which is an opioid antagonist, meaning the opioid receptors in our brain, naloxone binds to them, stops opioids from entering, and also it binds very strongly. So it knocks everything off. Right. What that does is if someone's overdosed, it knocks all the opioid off and mainly returns their breathing to a normal rate. If they don't have naloxone and they've overdosed, they die. Those are the two options when it comes to significant overdose.
Yeah. Look, given this increase in this situation, which has, by the way, been widely reported, is there anything as a whole that we in society ought to be doing? I notice that when I read about this, that a lot of these are younger people. I'm not saying it's just exclusively a young person problem, but certainly a lot of younger folks get addicted and have this significant health issue, a significant health issue, if not death, that results.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things. And that's an excellent question. It is addiction crosses, race and class, gender, age, all those things. But yes, disproportionately younger people try it. So I think the first thing is the reason that people are overdosing and dying, when it was really just heroin, for example, in the 60s and 70s, almost all overdoses were due to mixing heroin with something else. Overdosing on heroin by itself when you're tolerant is really difficult. Fentanyl's a different creature. So the first thing we have to do is decide, has our approach worked and have our remediation efforts worked? I humbly submit they haven't. To your point about, younger people and perhaps, a new...
We're out of time. Sorry, I have to interrupt you. We're out of time, but great update. All right, thanks for watching Pennsylvania Newsmakers. As always, we appreciate your viewership.